I spoke to you was about Isaiah 55. There's a prophecy Isaiah spoke about a people that would come thirsty to the water, but would find God's character rising up in them, and then they would be set forth into motion. The imagery that Isaiah closes this chapter with is that of the water cycle, and the idea that God's word moves. It's always in motion, and it sets out what it wants to accomplish. And at the end of that text, it says, you will go out in joy. You will be led forth in peace. So it's talking about a people that would go out. Okay, so you see where this is going. Well, this prophecy was fulfilled. A people that would go out. Now, we see the Great Commission here. Thank you, Davis, for reading that. I'm going to read it again. I can't read it too many times. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Very encouraging, right? Again, a people that are outward focused. We're commissioned to go. We are commissioned people. I was talking to my brother Lloyd the other day, and he was saying that the word here, go, it sounds like go and make disciples, but in Greek it's something more like as you are going. So we're very faithful to Christian rhythms. We build our lives on the rhythms of Christ. We meet here weekly. We take of the table. That was a wonderful thought for the table. Thank you for leading us to that. We're faithful in song. We study Scripture. We do the things that the model, we enjoy the model of the Christian life that we see in the New Testament. But Jesus here is saying, as we are going, make disciples. This is also part of the rhythm of Christian living, to make disciples. So it's important. We get that from Jesus here. It's obviously important. It's the last thing he said on earth here. So, great. I want to hammer this home even further. He says to his disciples before he sends them out in Matthew chapter 9, 37, it says, "Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field.'" So, it's part of the Christian rhythm, and not only that, I think the same truth applies today. The workers are few. Every one of us here are needed to make disciples. So, this is important. Okay, so how do we do it, though? I think that's kind of the question here. Our eldership, part of the reason I spoke to you about Isaiah 55, our eldership was talking about aspiring us to think outwardly, to think about the community, think about the needs of the community. How do we get the good news out there? How do we outreach? And I think we've started some efforts to do that, right? But ultimately, the goal of outreach is to make disciples. So let's learn some principles. Today, I'm going to talk to you about two all-star disciple makers. I kind of wish I had like some epic music, and you see the basketball lineups in this corner, or that's wrestling or boxing, whatever. There's corners in a basketball stadium. Okay, so anyway, Jesus, he is the original disciple maker, right? So we're going to learn from him. Though my comfort, I typically teach from a expository standpoint where we sit and dwell in a text and we just let the Word of God come to us as is. Today I thought it would be necessary, as we're thinking about outward focus, to kind of hit a topical study. So we're going to look at Jesus and some excerpts from Matthew and see can we glean some principles of disciple making? Can we glean some knowledge from the way he makes disciples? And Paul as well. We're going to focus on the book of Acts there. Paul, the world's best evangelist, right? The best church planner. This guy was super active, making disciples all the time. Surely we have something to learn from what he did. So we're going to look at the book of Acts there. The first thing, when I looked at Jesus and I looked at his disciple making, I think this started with who were his disciples, and this is the first thing that came to mind: the unexpected disciples. We see Jesus' selection in Matthew 4:18. We see a scene here on the beach, pulling the first disciples together. And then we see the complete list in Matthew 10, verses 1 through 4. So who are these guys? How did he make disciples? So if you'd use your imagination a little bit with me, I don't think this is historically accurate, but it helps, in my mind, capture the spirit of what's happening here. Imagine Jesus is the team captain, right? He's on the beach, and he's standing there, and you're next to him. You already picked him. He already picked you, okay? So you're standing there with Jesus, and he's got these guys in a row here, and imagine the social climate of middle school, right? You group everybody by stereotype. You've got the jock, You've got, I want him on my team. That guy's muscles are bigger than my head. And you got a little scrawny kid over here. And then the guy that's not even paying attention. Okay, so this is the roster. And Jesus is picking the team. And the first person, hey, Peter. And you guys know what facepalm is? Adults, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so when you're like, oh, come on, really? That's facepalm. So he's like, Peter. And you're like, facepalm. Not on my team. Please, not Peter. Peter has a foot-shaped mouth. This is Peter the over-eager. He's the guy that raises his hand in class. I know the answer, please, please, please. And then he's confused. So this guy, are you sure, Jesus? Are you sure? Let's keep going. Maybe Jesus has better picks. Matthew, the tax collector. Facepalm. I don't want Matthew on my team. He's basically a Roman. And I love in the text, they're just like, and the sinners and tax collectors. They just group them together. They're just, you're not even one of us. Yeah, you're as bad as a Gentile. So we got Matthew. Really? I don't want that guy. How is he going to be loyal to us? He's not loyal to our people. Ugh. Okay. Thomas. Really? This guy's facepalm. Okay. This guy is going to live in rhythm with you for 3 years, seeing who you really are, and then when you come back to life, nah. That's not you. Yeah, oh, yes it is. So Thomas, the doubter. And as Ethan here mentioned, the traitor. He picked a traitor for a disciple. I knew. He picked a traitor. So, facepalm, again. And you're sitting here on the beach with Jesus, and he's picking these guys, and you're just like, what are you thinking? What are you up to? Are you sure you want these people to be disciples? This is the B team. This is the C team. This is third string. They didn't make the cut on any other school, so they went anyway. So, aren't we all the B team? You think about it. So the question is, what is the prereq? What is that thing that makes you able to be a disciple? And if we find this in Matthew 10:39, let's flip over here. We're gonna do a lot of flipping, so if you like this, join me. I hear a lot of pages turning. It's exciting. Okay, so. In 10:39 it says, whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever, I'll say it one time, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's it. That's the prereq. That's all. You don't have to be intelligent. You don't have to be put together. You don't have to be good looking. You don't have to be, insert there. These qualifications, these are men that we wouldn't want on our team. We wouldn't necessarily want to source them out as disciples. But you know what? They had that only prerequisite for making a disciple. And that is the willingness to follow Christ. Giving your life to Christ is the only commitment you need. So, folks, hear me here. When we think about outreach, when we think about evangelism, when we think about making contacts for ministry, it doesn't matter. It might be the weird guy that comes up to you. The guy that smells funny. The guy that's like, oh, I know he's a nut job. Great! The only thing you need to follow Christ is a willingness to give your life for Him. That's it. So I knew this person in high school that did a lot of high school outreach, and her theory was to she outreached to the football players, thinking, okay, these are the trendsetters, these are the influential people, right? And so she geared stuff, personally invited them to their house and did a lot of ministry with them, and the idea that it would kind of spread down. And I'll tell you what, it didn't work. It kind of turned into a clique. There was very little outreach happening. What I'm saying is that if we look at Jesus' model, if we glean from him a principle, anyone can be a disciple. Okay, so don't be picky. We're all the B team. Okay, so what's another teaching that Jesus shows us? When we think of outward focus, when we aspire to get in the community, there's kind of this undertone of growth. The idea that if we're thinking about others, if we're preaching the good news successfully, that numbers will just happen. It will happen. We see the amazing Acts church where after the Pentecost, thousands came. And maybe there's some anticipation here that will just explode. And God can certainly do that. I'm not going to turn him down. I don't think any of us would turn it down if thousands of people started coming here. Wow, thanks God for sending him that way. But when I see Jesus' disciple making, I see that numbers aren't key. And I think this is important because we tend to measure success of discipleship or success of outreach by numbers. Kind of business, American mindset is kind of what we want to see. We want to see our bang for the buck. We want to see a lot of people here. We want to see numbers. So what I learned from Jesus is numbers aren't key. I see in Matthew 7, verse 13. This is the guy that wants everybody to come to him. This is Jesus talking. This is his words. This is the one that says, whoever. Open is wide open, right? But unfortunately, this is kind of sobering. It says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life. Only a few find it. So even in our best efforts, even in our best outreach, what we're being told here is, guys, not many people are going to fill that prerequisite. Not many people are going to want to give their lives to Christ. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's not, numbers aren't key. I see another verse here in chapter 14 or chapter 10, verse 14. We see another text here that talks about numbers. He's telling his disciples before they go out into the world and outreach. He says, where am I at here? If anyone will not welcome you and listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town. That's kind of sobering too. Now, disclaimer, this is not talking about Christians. We can't shake the dust off each other's feet. Okay, we're a family. We're a body. We're a unit. We're one organism. You can't just cut somebody, amputate somebody out. Okay, so we got to get along. Okay, but you're not well received, move on. This is talking about unbelievers. They don't want to hear your message, move on. Maybe still keep a friendship, absolutely. Now, I've had to learn this in my own life because I have a couple friends of mine that I've talked to, and I want to come to faith, and for that, really, I've had to shake the dust off my feet a little bit because this is a tough reality, but Jesus doesn't seem to be concerned. If someone isn't receptive, move on. Keep moving. Okay, so this is encouraging for us because we're going to get discouraged when people, why didn't you come to Christ? Why aren't you making a disciple? Why aren't we seeing spiritual growth in you? Not everybody's going to make this decision, so that's something we got to keep in mind. So if numbers aren't key, what is? Well, I would argue, Ethan, how do I say that word? Let's say it again. Okay. This is no. Okay. That's a lot of syllables for that brief. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the Greek word that is talking about at this the Great Commission. It says, "Go make disciples." It's one word in Greek. Make disciples is one word. So let's dive into that. We see Jesus calling the people on the beach, and there I just picked that as a reference point. But we see the relationship with the disciples. He calls them. They drop everything, and they spend 3 years with him, living in rhythm with him. This is a lot of time. This is time-intensive work. When Jesus made disciples, he dropped everything, and he spent a lot of time with those people. Okay, this is quality relationship. Okay, so another thing, the word metateteo means making disciples. Disciple in Greek is like pupil, apprentice to a master craftsman, right? These are long-term relationships. A pupil to a master teacher, an apprentice to a master craftsman. These are things that are in-depth, they're long, they're gradual, they're slow. The apprentice is not very gifted, right? He's not very good at making whatever the thing he's going to make. Let's say he's a carpenter. I'm a horrible carpenter. Don't ask me to build anything. It will fall apart. Just don't. If I'm on a construction project, let somebody else do it, like Floyd or somebody. But so if I wanted to take a master carpenter and I wanted to shadow him, I've got a lot of work to do, right? I've got a long way to go. And it's going to take that person a lot of patience and a lot of teaching and a lot of time to get me to where I need to be. Okay, so this is the kind of relationship that we're talking about. So Jesus, we see him not focused so much on numbers, but the quality of relationship is intense. Are you ready to pour out your lives into someone? Are you ready to invest deeply in your time? It's going to be time-consuming. If we're serious about outreach, if we're serious about making disciples, it's going to ask a lot of your time. And it's going to be in-depth relationships. This is intimacy. This is long-term relationships. Are you willing to do that? Discipleship doesn't just happen here on Sunday morning. Okay, not much discipleship will happen in the one-way conversation that the service is. Okay, this is long-term partnership. The disciples worked together. They did ministry together. They fed people together. They did miracles together. They did a lot together. Okay, just hanging out, talking, sharing stories, teaching each other. So this is the kind of relationship that we're talking about. If we look at Jesus' outreach style, this is this is important too. I talked to Steve Meeks. He's a missionary to Kenya for 18 years. And you think, wow, 18 years, he's probably changed thousands of lives. He said, well, in the grand scheme of things, I probably only really made a difference in about 3 or 4 people's lives. He's talking about the people he spent a lot of time with. You ask Will Tucker the same thing. He spent a lot of time with this guy named Joseph in a village in Badede. Will Tucker's in Uganda if you don't know him. And this one guy that he spent a lot of time with, the fruits of that relationship are just visible. And so we're not looking for numbers. We're not looking for a mile wide, an inch deep. We're looking for a handful of really deep relationships. That's what the model we see with Jesus. 12 people, that's it. And they changed the world. 12 people. We have more than 12 here. 12 people changed the world. We have 12 people discipling Christ. Now, and also, I do want a disclaimer here. This is not just a long-term relationship with us. Ultimately, this is talking about a long-term relationship with Christ. So we're discipling them to Christ. But that journey we do together. We're alongside them. But that long-term relationship is with Christ. So if we're leading people to that, if you see people that are following people, work that you've done, ministry you've done, outreach you've done, and leading them in long-term relationship with Christ, that's making disciples. Okay, so are you ready to invest your time? If we're really serious about outward focus, it's part of the Christian rhythm, as the Great Commission says. So, okay, now let's move on. Paul. What do we learn from Paul? Paul, I'm using Paul's words here. All things to all people. And I'll explain what I mean by this. But this is the idea of Paul being so flexible and resourceful with everything that he has at his around him. He's going to use every context he's in to advance the gospel. He's going to use every context he's in to make disciples. Everything he has for making disciples. All things to all people. This is immense flexibility. So I like to start with this one, cultural camouflage. If you turn me to the book of Acts, I love this story. Acts 17, 22 and 23. So you guys know the Areopagus, Mars Hill. This is a scene where Paul is talking to these guys. This is the equivalent I can think of to modern day times would be like going to a philosophy department in like a big Ivy League school and saying, "Hey, I'm going to evangelize." Paul's great. Okay, so he's bold. Here he says, 17:22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." He's affirming them. He's finding something good, complimenting them. "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now what you worship is something unknown I'm going to proclaim to you." Okay, so what is this all about? How is this significant? Well, he found a way to bridge a cultural gap. Okay, so reading a book about eating the elephant or something. It was like a book about outreach, and it was talking about people and their association with the gospel, right? And the culture is often removed from understanding the significance, so you kind of have to walk them all the way to it, and for them to get the significance of why Jesus died and why he rose and why that's a big deal. So Paul's doing the same thing here. What he's doing is he cares so much about everybody around him that he did his homework, that he studied them, that he carefully, it says, "I looked carefully at your objects of worship." He's getting involved in their lives and he's understanding what are they missing. There's got to be a bridge here that I could get them to understand the significance of the gospel and make a disciple. And the bridge he found is this altar to an unknown God. So follow with me here. They have a big buffet of gods, right? We have every god. We know everything, but there's this one like little altar over here that we don't have. We acknowledge that we're missing something. They acknowledged it. Paul found that acknowledgement that they're missing something, and he's saying, look, at the heart of that, I know who that unknown God is, and there's some good news. You need to hear about him. So great. So how do we apply this? Speaking the language of the lost. He's getting in and he's understanding their culture and to reach them. You know, Christ did not say, "Hey, come up to heaven and then that's how you get to me." No, he came down to us. He came to the lost. He condescended. He reached down to where they were, walked in our shoes, and then won us to himself. Are we ready to walk in their shoes? Paul did. He did his homework. He loved them so much that he studied their idols and said, "Hey, you have something missing." Now, I do want to say, how does this apply to today? This missing thing, this altar to the unknown God, what is that in today's culture? I'll give you a parallel. Perhaps in my generation, it might be community, for example. We readily acknowledge that we need it, but we find it in different places. Some people my age find it in fraternities or gangs, or especially the online community. Like, that's my community. My Facebook friends, that's my community. Well, they're missing something. They're missing community. And I can show them, I can use that as a bridge. Say, you want true community? Well, here it is. And it's, it doesn't look like a community that you would enjoy, but trust me, this is what true community looks like. So the idea that Paul built a bridge using their understanding, he showed them how to arrive at the gospel. So this is how to make disciples. We're going to have to use some cultural camouflage. And another thing, this is important too. We see in 18, 1 through 4, and 20, 35, references to Paul making tents. Okay, so why is this significant? He used every context he had for the gospel. Okay, so I was reading a commentary by a guy named Ben Witherington. He's a Bible scholar, historian, and his guess as to why Paul stayed in the tent-making trade. He may have worked at his trade deliberately in order to make more contacts and thus win more converts. So Paul is rooting himself. He's studying them. He's working alongside them, the secular world. He doesn't withdraw. Remember, we're called to be not of the world, but in it. Right? We're of a different world, but we're still in this one. And so we don't want to draw our walls around ourselves. Remember, we talked about in Isaiah 55 the idea of kind of keeping all that we had to ourselves, the Dead Sea. You guys remember that imagery? Paul is not doing that at all. He's pouring everything he has. He's doing all things to all people. His flexibility, his commitment to seeing everything, every context that he's in as an opportunity to make disciples. So are you looking at your work that way? Paul did. He still made tents. He was still in that world. Your work is a mission field. Where do you spend most of your time? A lot of it's at work, right? That's your mission field. Are you treating it that way? Paul did. So all things to all people, use every context that you're in, every flexibility you have to understand, to meet people where they are, and to bring them to Christ. So, what else do we learn from Paul? Never fear failure. And this is, I think, maybe one of the biggest points today. Never fear failure. How did Paul treat rejection? So, Sam and Bill and I, Bill's in the children's church room, we stood out here in the rain one day trying to give out coffee, right? And no one came. We felt pretty defeated. I have a kind of a more horrible story here in Scripture about defeat. If you want to follow with me to Acts 14, 19. Paul's doing some ministry, and then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. That's how Paul treated rejection. We felt a little beat up because no one came to our free coffee. And we were real sad. Paul, they thought he was dead. That's rejection. No one threw rocks at us. It did rain. I mean, the worst that we could have got, I guess someone throwing our coffee back in our face or something, get burned. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. But we didn't get rejected that bad. I'll put it that way. Paul got rejected. And you know what his strategy was? Well, he got back up and moved on to he went back into the city the day of. They threw him out. He went back into the city the day of, and then he shook the dust off his feet and went to Derbe, another city. So we shouldn't get defeated, should we? Okay. Yeah, I feel really silly about my emotional breakdown with the coffee. Because Paul's literally broken, So anyway, now I'm going to move on to another story. 16. Let's see another rejection. 16. This is arguably, in my opinion, one of the best stories in the book of Acts. This is 16:25. I'm going to start there. So what's going on here? Ultimate rejection, right? We don't want your good news. We don't want it, so we're going to throw you in prison. You can't get much more rejected than that unless they finished him off and killed him, but they didn't. So he's been rejected by society. They don't want your good news, Paul. You're wearing your heart on your sleeve. and they're stomping all over it. What are you going to do, Paul? You going to give up? You going to cry in prison? Well, you know what? Here's what happened. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying, singing hymns to God. Okay, he handled that really well. And the other prisoners were listening to him. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundation of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open and everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Wow. Okay. So even in his rejection, even in his failure, if you will, he's been rejected by society, he's failed. He was announcing the good news, and he announced it, and they threw him in prison. And even in that, the way that he lived, the way that he treated rejection was so powerful that he made a disciple out of rejection. Isn't this awesome? So, what are those things that frustrate you? You know, let's say you're in traffic, and you're in how you treat the situation you're in, people are going to see it's an opportunity of ministry. It's an opportunity to make a disciple. Because if you're, banging on the steering wheel and saying all these kind of words, choice words, are you making disciples? Is what you're doing testifying to the truth of what you have, or the truth of whose you are, or who you know? Paul's did. The way he was rejected, he was singing and praying. I love this, because the guy's question isn't, okay, so what is it that you believe in that's so different? Or everything about Paul's life told him what he needed to do. He just wanted to know how to be saved. His exposure to Paul was so, he made an enemy a disciple. Paul, through his very life, everything that he did, even how he treated rejection, was disciple making. So let me ask you, this is a tough question. It's hard. I'm asking myself the same question. Is the way that you treat everything in your life show people the truth of whose you are, or whose disciple you are? And it did for Paul, even the way he treated prison. So this is huge. And this is a context where he probably said, "Oh, I'm a failure. I'm a missionary failure." And he made a disciple in his failure. God can use wonderful things like that. So, I was feeling bad about the coffee thing. So this cheered me up. Now, another thing that's important about Paul is his persistence. We see two scenes here that I'm referencing. He's in line to be, he's arrested. And he's like, whoa, let me preach real quick. Okay, so he's being arrested again, and he preaches. He doesn't give up. This guy's persistent. He kept at it. We see another scene at the end of the book of Acts in 28. We see that under house arrest, he's still preaching. He's still teaching. Everything that he does is geared for making disciples. So, does that define us? Is everything that we do geared for making disciples? Is the way that we treat our trials, is the way that we treat our failures, is the way that is that all geared for discipleship? Paul's was. Everything that he did stated the gospel truth. Are we there? So, and another thing that, in terms of failure and fearing failure, Paul was a church planner, and we can't really call up like, "Yo, Corinth Church of Christ, you there?" There may be one there today, but it wouldn't be that same church. There's not an eldership that's been there for 2,000 years, right? So in some ways, by most of our measures of success, he failed. The church isn't there, right? But God used all of that because he made disciples, right? Even if, theoretically, this is 50 years from now, this church isn't here. If we've made disciples, the gospel's still going on. So it's not about the organization. It's not about the structure. It's about making disciples. It's about leading people to long-term relationship with Christ. So failure is even a context for making disciples. So I'm going to back out and kind of summarize. But look at the impact he had. I mean, regardless, the disciples he made disciples, and those disciples made disciples. This all began with Jesus. He made 12 disciples, and look, we're here. We're here, that many years apart. Discipleship. Go and make disciples. As you are going, disciple. So let me back out and kind of summarize. Disciples might be very unlikely people. That's what we learned from Jesus. Might be the B team, but aren't we all the B team? So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about outreach. The only thing we're looking for is a willingness to die to Christ. That's it. That's the only thing we're looking for. So you never know when you might find someone that will be a disciple. And disciples are long-term relationships. We see that in Jesus' model. We see that within the word disciple. This is a long-term relationship. Are you ready to invest that kind of time? Are you ready to invest that kind of intimacy with these people? As we are going disciple, this is something that is part of the rhythm of being a Christian. And from Paul, we learn to connect with people where we are. All things to all people. These people are far from the gospel. Well, you know what? He's going to help them to understand. He's going to go to where they are, study their objects of worship carefully, and show them how to walk to Christ. So we need to do that kind of conviction to connect with people where they are and where they are in the workplace too, right? That's why Paul made tents. He supported himself. He was rooted in the secular world. Don't isolate yourself too much, but connect with the people where they are and be that incarnational presence of discipleship. And disciple makers have nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Paul, almost stoned to death, and then put in prison, on and on and on. And you see the conviction of that generation of disciple makers. To die is gain, right? To die is gain. So whoever will lose my life for his sake will find it. These people really found their lives. Are you there? Are you ready to lose your life for Christ? So I want to come back and read it one more time to the Great Commission. We are a commissioned people, folks. Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." I'll read that again. "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." This is not something we do alone. We don't outreach on our own. We are with Jesus. Jesus is with us, and he cares and loves for those people so much. And so don't be discouraged as we think about outward focus, as we try new outreaches. Just keep in mind these principles of discipleship. We're looking for long-term, fruitful relationships, and Jesus is with us every step of the way to the very end of the age. So this is work we have to do. This is part of the Christian rhythm, making disciples. If you're here this morning and this is something maybe you've neglected in your heart, that making disciples is not something that you've made a priority, and you don't have that, if you want God to reignite the passion for a missional heart, for sharing the gospel, we'd invite you to come and pray, and we'll pray with you. It's something we want God to bless the whole congregation with, a missional heart, a commissioned heart. And if you're here this morning and you're like, "Disciple, I'm not one of those, but that sounds really good to me." Well, you heard Jesus' word, whoever, and this is the start point of discipleship behind me. Baptism. Yeah, when the prisoner came and said, "What must I do to be saved?" He repented, he believed, and then he went into the pool, and that whole family came to Christ. So if you're there that morning and you want to become a disciple, the invitation's open. Join the B team. Come as we stand and sing.
I gave my life for thee, my precious blood I shed, that thou mightst ransom me, and bring them from the dead. I gave my life for thee. What hast thou given for me?